Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And I'm Nicole Reiner. If you like the show, please rate and review it on the platforms wherever you listen to podcasts, particularly on Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find us and grow the show. And of course, you can learn more about Flute New Music Consortium at flutenewmusicconsortium.com. Indian-American composer Asha Srinivasan draws from her Western musical training and Indian heritage to create her compositional language. Her music has been presented at various national and international venues, and it has been discussed in dissertations and scholarly work. Her works have been released on CD by Ablaze Records, Mark Records, Beauport Classical, and Seamus CD Series, Volume 22. She has served on the board of the American Composers Forum as a panel judge for the National Endowment for the Arts, and in 2012, she co-hosted the Seamus National Conference. Asha is currently Associate Professor of Music in Theory, Composition, and Electronic Music at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. We first got to know Asha when her flute-cello duo, Dviraag, won FNMC's Composition Competition back in 2015. Asha, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time today.
Thank you for having me. That was a nice surprise.
Yeah, it's nice to reconnect, as we'll talk about.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah.
Sorry, my voice is like not the best for any kind of interview, but I just get vocal fatigue sometimes from time to time, and so then it's kind of like this.
That's interesting because I was about to ask you about your singing career.
I don't have a singing career.
But listeners who are maybe newer to FNMC, we're kind of backing up and talking a little bit about history, both your piece Dviraag, which we'll talk about later, and some of the collaboration that you, Elizabeth, and I did one year at NFA. So it was interesting because I felt like I got to know you a little bit from that project, but sitting, backing up and researching you a little bit to prepare for this interview was fascinating. You have had a fascinating life. And so I wanted to talk briefly about your time growing up in India. You took voice lessons in Carnatic music, which is the classical music of southern India. Your mom is a professional singer of Indian film songs and sings all over the US. Was there pressure to become a musician in your family?
No, there really wasn't. So the way, I come from the Tamil Brahmin community. We're affectionately known as Tambrams.
Cute.
So one of the cultural values for this group is to enrich oneself with music, dance, cuisine art, I suppose, cooking, things like that. But it's not really thought of as a career choice. And my mother is, she's not a professional singer in that she'd never, well, so she did gig, I suppose, but it was, she had a day job here in the US. And I think she would have liked to have had a career in music, but she was discouraged. I mean, she used to tell me, and when she was growing up in India, I mean, that was not appropriate for a woman. And so, she got a bachelor's degree in science, and then she came to the US after she got married, and she just did what a lot of mothers do, right? Just kind of take whatever job she could do. A lot of that was office work. She got really good at that. So music was an outlet for her, and she found her independence here in the United States away from those social taboos, and she was able to, perform, lead her own band. She used to do her own sound. At the same time, she always had this feeling that music is very difficult to have a career in, right? It's not a safe bet. And of course, family is so important. So if you want to raise a family and you want to have sort of all of the trappings of a capitalist nuclear family life, I suppose, you need to earn well. And so actually music was discouraged as a career, but it was encouraged in terms of the artistic aspect, if that makes sense. So she was the one who recognized that I had some inkling for music. She was rehearsing with her band. I remember this very clearly. I was probably in about fifth grade, and I had one of those little toy keyboards, like little 25 key, dinky little, I don't know, Casio or something. And I had been following along her rehearsal, and I showed her afterwards, look, I can play this tune from the rehearsal. And so she got me a bigger keyboard, and she encouraged me. In fact, I even performed with her, so she was very encouraging in that way. But when it came to college and majoring in music, both my parents were, nervous about that, as I think even today, a lot of parents are, of course, for good reason. Being a parent now, totally get it. What they were great about, both my parents, is letting me try it out and talking about how to make music more pragmatic. Like, I actually did an arts administration degree because my father was like, you might want to get some, tools in marketing and accounting and economics and things like that, which was probably very smart. And I did enjoy it to some extent. But yeah, it kind of branched out in many different directions in college, but music always kind of stood ahead just because I had already had so much experience in it. So, and I had some great teachers in my college, and that always helps. So, yeah, that's why I ended up pursuing music.
It sounds similar to the struggles that I have with my students and their parents, but without the well-informed practical advice. So I love that you had that at least.
Well, I think they were willing to give me a chance to try. And I think that what I recognize now is that they trusted that I would figure something out, even if it wasn't music. Maybe it was office work, maybe it was going in a completely different direction, but that I would figure something out as long as I was still working, at the best level I could. They also didn't have any understanding of what I was doing, because Indian music is very, very different, as you may know. And for them, composing was really like even now I have relatives who will say, well, are you going to write for Bollywood?
Mhm.
Are you going to go work for, you should really do that. And I think the idea of chamber music, it was very, very foreign.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about the cultural differences? So, how old were you when you moved to the US? And then do whatever you want with this question. I don't know if this is possible to answer, but I'm curious what turns your music study took when you left India and came to the US.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I was 6, I was studying Carnatic music, as you mentioned. My mother tried to teach me because she could, but doesn't go so well when the mother tries to teach the daughter. So she realized I needed someone formal to do it, and so I had this wonderful elderly lady, and it was an extracurricular activity with 2 other girls. And so when I left and I came here, I had a huge cultural shift, obviously. Now we moved to Maryland, and Maryland is very heavily populated with Indian Americans. I mean, that's true everywhere in the US, or I should say everywhere in the world. Pretty much, you can find Indians everywhere. But in Maryland in particular, there are a lot. And so what that meant is there's a really robust community. So there was an Indian music school, for example, where teachers were teaching Carnatic music and dance. And so you could really move from India and come right into your music studies. And I was enrolled in lessons, but my brain was being expanded in many different directions because, of course, I was in an American school, and so I was part of the elementary music curriculum. And I started disliking, or maybe, it's one of those things that kids do where it's like, I don't really want to do this thing anymore. So I told my parents I didn't want to continue Indian music. I think at that time, really from like 9 to, high school, I would say, I was trying to figure out my identity. Like, am I leaving behind who I was in India? I need to become American, right? Americanized. It wasn't anything so conscious as what I'm describing, but I think that was probably what was going on. So I wanted to be more like my American friends. And so doing Indian music would have been like, that's just weird, right? That's it. I was embarrassed. I remember being embarrassed about my mother or my grandmother wearing saris outside, which now I look back, I'm like, that was ridiculous. But that's how kids think, I guess. And so unfortunately, I stopped Indian music. But fortunately, I got really into Western music, which was wonderful. because I learned more about harmony. In high school, I really enjoyed singing in choir. I was in the chamber singers and I was an alto. And I really think that had a lot to do with why I ended up composing music, because I was an alto, so you're in the inner part and you're seeing how everything fits together. And that really turned me on. I was fascinated by how all the parts fit together. And so I would take a piece that we were learning in chamber singers, and I had a multi-track recorder on my keyboard, and I would play each part separately and learn each part so that I could just kind of better understand how they went together. That's how my music studies really turned, is, I was fascinated by Renaissance music and all the kinds of music that high school choirs do. And then thinking about, how can I do that? Can I do that?
You sound like a natural engineer.
Well, there is a puzzle aspect to it for sure.
Yeah.
My brother is a software engineer, actually. And we always talk about how we both have a need to problem solve and are curious, but we took it in very different directions. He says, yeah, I couldn't deal with the subjectivity of the humanities and the arts. I needed objective answers. And for me, I was really intrigued by that. So I love the humanities too, for this reason. And yeah, I think it's kind of like a puzzle brain.
Yeah, that sounds like it. You talk about in your bio that you draw upon both your Indian and your Western heritage in your own compositional language. Is it possible to parse those two out? I want to ask what from Indian music and what from Western music you keep in your toolkit, but I recognize that might be overly simplistic also.
Well, it's a good way to start, because that's really kind of how I started thinking about it too. I think the more I've been composing in this way, what I heard this phrase cross-cultural composition, and that's kind of the closest that I can resonate with that. And in this style, I think I was thinking about it more discreetly when I was younger. And the older I've gotten, it's become more intertwined, where it's a little bit harder to really tease it out. But I'm fine with teasing it out, because I know that is interesting from a listener's perspective. I've certainly heard that from my own audiences. So Western music is what I studied in college, of course, and in graduate school. And so, my harmonic language mixes dissonance and consonance. I have greater emphasis on fifths and fourths and seconds, of course. My music deals with ensemble interactions in a lot of ways that are Western. So contrapuntal independence, Hocketing textures, how to deal with homophony, right? Like the relationships of the different instruments. But of course, I tap into Indian music's heterophony, which is a word that not a lot of Western musicians might be familiar with. But heterophony just means where multiple instrumentalists or musicians are playing the same basic line with variation. So you see this a lot in jazz, for example, and it's very common in Indian music. From the Western music perspective, timbre is a very important aspect to me. I don't write timbral music, like solely timbral music, but where the timbre sort of drives the music. But whether it's through extended techniques or just simply paying close attention to register and dynamics and articulation, I'm always aware of the resulting timbre of the music. And I think that comes from Western training. In terms of the Indian music elements, raga is one of the main components, and the fact that my music tends to be pitch driven, I've come to accept that over the years, that I am really intrigued by, different combinations and permutations of pitch. And raga is a great way for me to try to organize that. Again, over the years, I think I've moved toward a better understanding of raga as a concept. I did in the early days think of it as just a scale and just these pitches, but now I think I'm working toward a more satisfying combination of raga-based melodic structures within a Western contemporary piece. But it's always a work in progress. Singing is the source of my material. I sing when I compose, and so that is, for me, I would say, derived from Indian music, because even instrumental classical music in India is trying to mimic the voice. Rhythmically, I'm drawing a lot from Indian music, so rhythmic permutations at the small unit level. I don't think I'll ever get tired of that. It's so fun to play with. And at the same time, Indian music also has this alap section in North and South Indian music where it's just very free. a free approach to rhythm that focuses more on duration and breathing. And so that kind of music also comes into play with what I do. So I hope that's helpful, just a few specific concrete elements that I might be taking. But you're right that it's harder to tease out once the piece is composed.
That was a ton. That was very helpful.
Yay.
Thank you. It was very teacherly also.
I guess so.
And I also had a question for you about that. You're teaching at a private liberal arts college in a remote part of northern Wisconsin, certainly a place where students have long flocked to the music program. I mean, Lawrence is well known for this, but there's a lot of beautiful wide open space all around you.
Yeah.
You were not terribly close to Milwaukee or Chicago, right?
This is true.
What kind of cultural or artistic journeys do you find yourself guiding your students through at Lawrence?
And that is, okay, so that's changed over, I've been there for 16 years.
Mhm.
So some things have stayed the same and some things have changed. All of the students, there's one thing in common. They have this quest to absorb and grow and discover what moves them, what guides them, right? I mean, I think making art is really a process of self-discovery. And so, they might come in thinking one way, and then they're more exposed to different ways of making music, composition techniques and experiments of the 20th century, and other artists like themselves who are trying to figure things out. And they slowly go through a transformation. And is a really rewarding process to witness over and over again. But each time the individual is different, right? So it's like those unique characteristics of a student come through. So I think those are some things that are really similar. Students are trying to connect with who they are. Sometimes that takes place through culture. So I have one student who's been engaging with Irish folk music, for example, a student who did a student who graduated a few years ago. They were Lebanese, and so they were working with some of those, maqam and Middle Eastern features. But then other people are interested in some social justice issues, climate issues, identity issues. I have a student who's working on a song cycle using public domain poetry by a lesser known female suffragist. And I know that aspect was really important to her. But I still have the students who are writing that like really gnarly, complex music. I have one student who's writing an extended extended technique piece for oboe because he plays oboe and he can do those cool things. I often have students who draw inspiration from places they go in the summer or on break. So, maybe it's in the Midwest or maybe not. A lot of my students are from the Midwest, but we do have students from the coasts as well. So yeah, I think those are some aspects that I see with students, what they're trying to draw from.
I was trying to think of a smooth segue, but I don't have one. Our next question had to do with a panel that you and Nicole and I did at an NFA convention. I've forgotten in what year. And I remember you giving some really thoughtful advice about how performers can be better musical partners with their composers. Do you have any thoughts you would like to share with our audience now on that topic?
I think it was 2017, maybe. I know it was in Minneapolis. I'm pretty sure. I think that's
That sounds close.
Yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed that a lot. I think I don't remember what I said at the time, but probably hasn't really changed much. Performers are amazing. I love performers. So, I don't want this to sound like I'm preaching or, trying to be sort of didactic about it. I really, really appreciate the creativity that performers bring. I'm not a performer, and so I really appreciate what has to happen to get a piece of music to the level of a performance and to interpret it for an audience. It's such an important role. I think if you're a performer who wants to work with composers to create new music, we all share a role in that, right? In propagating and creating new music. So the more collaborative you can be, the better. The more collaborative, less transactional. Like, I love the commissions where I might be able to send drafts and get recordings back in the middle or ask someone questions along the way. And the more open a performer is to that, the more likely I feel comfortable doing that. So if a performer just said, hey, I want you to write this piece, and then they don't really communicate with me during that time period, then I might feel less open myself. Because one thing you might need to realize is composing is very, very vulnerable, and submitting a piece, sharing a piece that is in the middle of your process can feel incredibly uncomfortable. I know that firsthand, and I've had to really work on that myself to get to the point where I can share a draft. So just know that. I think if you can make it more like not just, okay, I've asked for a commission, I get the piece done at the end, and have it be more of a process. Give enough time for a commission. Every composer's process is different. I'm impressed by some of these composers who can just churn out a piece in 2 months and it's good. Of course, there are a lot of people who do it and it's not good. So maybe just be open with the composer. How long do they need to write the piece, and plan for that? Because for me, the best commissions are where I have plenty of time so that I can make mistakes, so that I can throw things away and redo it. You might want to acknowledge and understand that when you compose, you're taking time. And so not every composer requires monetary compensation. It may not be monetary, but if there's an in-kind compensation, you might want to be thinking about that. Something like performing a work many times is like gold. Creating a solid video and audio recording, nothing could be better than that. So there are ways to work with a composer where it's not just about the fee, but I think having that conversation is important. Whatever a performer can do to share and distribute the music of the composer to other performers and students, just like you have with the wonderful Flute New Music Consortium, I should say, is fantastic. Because at least for me, as not being a performer, that is one of the hardest things for me, is to meet with other performers and get my music in front of other people who will play it. So those are some ideas that you might work with.
Awesome. Thanks.
Great advice. And speaking of repeat performances, it's been a while now. I mentioned this in the intro at the beginning of this episode, but years ago you wrote this gorgeous and really fun and fascinating piece for flute and cello called Dviraag, and it won FNMC's composition competition back in 2015, early days for us. Which is how we first got a chance to meet you. And there was a nice little rash of performances of that piece when it came out. It's been a while now, and I would love to see another fever spread and more performances of this piece. So for our listeners who are maybe a little bit newer to the organization and the repertoire, can you tell us about the piece?
Sure. Yeah, I wrote it in 2009, I believe. And actually, it's one of the pieces that is a mainstay of my repertoire. It is still being performed. I just got a note from Elizabeth McNutt, who's programmed it in Texas. And it's such that students also play it now. It used to be a piece that was really, really hard. And now I think it's just out there and people play it, which is fantastic, and I really appreciate that. So the piece is for flute and cello, and it was written for a consortium of flute and cello duos. There were 4 of them who had decided that they wanted more flute cello repertoire. And at the time, there weren't not that many. Now I think there are a lot more pieces for that combination. And it's a great combination because cello has such an expansive range, and you get that low end, and then the flute covers the high end. It's just a huge range between the 2 of them. The piece also uses C as its tonic, which makes a lot of sense because cello's got the C on the bottom, and flute, you all have that high C is like a pretty reliable high note there. So they kind of work really well together. The duo that was leading the commission, they're called the Terra Voce Duo. They were performing a lot of music on their program that were from different parts of the world. So they were creating this kind of cross-cultural program. So they wanted a piece that really showcased Indian musical elements. So they told me that as part of the commission. And they wanted a really energetic piece, something that had a lot of rhythmic drive to complement their program. So that really helped guide me. One of the pieces that they used to pick my piece was called Alone Dancing, which was one of my earliest flute and electronic pieces, also something that still gets performed. And so there were some interesting rhythmic elements in that they specifically pointed to. So the piece uses a Carnatic music exercise, a vocal exercise that I remember learning in India, as we talked about with that teacher that I mentioned. And I've always been fascinated by this exercise because it just has a really interesting rhythmic pattern. It's not just your typical Da 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 da. It's not just like simple, right? So I decided to transcribe that and use that as a basis for this piece. So the first thing you hear in the cello is this exercise, and it's kind of passed on to the flute. And then I drew all of the motivic material from that particular exercise. It was one of the first times too in my music that I decided to start with a bang. Since they wanted a fiery rhythmic piece, it starts with a fanfare in the flute, and then it actually goes into a slow movement. Normally it flips around, like I'm usually starting slow and getting bigger, like a lot of Indian music, almost all classical Indian music does. So this kind of flipped that around, and then of course I end it big again. So it's kind of a fun, showy piece. I think it has some good duo interactions. It was a great opportunity for me to think about the ensemble of a duo really being two soloists and how they could interact with one another.
Well, you've mentioned two of the pieces in your catalog that I know pretty well, but we always like to ask the composers that we're interviewing what's on their workbench now. So, what can we expect from you in the near future?
Well, hopefully a bass flute and electronics piece.
What?
So yeah, this is well timed. I'm finally collaborating with my colleague Erin Lesser, who is the flutist in Alarm Will Sound and Wet Ink, and just does a lot of great new music. She's been a wonderful champion of my music, and she and I are in the works where I don't know when someone hears this later, maybe it will be done, but we are trying to get an album together of flute plus music, so flute and other instruments of my music with her, as the featured flutist. And we would like to do a new piece. And she's got this great contrabass and a bass flute. She specializes in low flutes. So I'm hoping to do something like that.
Well, you'll have to thank Erin for us. That sounds really exciting.
Yeah, and keep us posted.
For sure.
While we're on the subject of new projects, do you have any dream projects? The way I always like to couch this is if time wasn't an issue, if money were no object, what would you like to find yourself getting into?
Well, I think that music and drama are always in the back of my mind. I actually wrote a piece that premiered in April. Yeah, April for, I don't know if you know Chelsea Zukra, flutist in Switzerland.
We
Call
just
Sasa.
interviewed her not that long ago.
That's awesome. Oh,
Which
she's
was a
so
delight.
great. Oh my gosh, she's great. So
Yeah.
she's got a group called Damselfly Trio, which is for soprano, flute, and harp. And they commissioned me for this piece. And I wrote a piece called Boomija Returns. It was a great premiere, and hoping to have the studio recording released soon. It ended up being a monodrama. And there's like a little scene essentially that the text I made concocted the text from this scene. And I really liked that way of working. It went much better than I thought. And I think something like that in the future, I don't know if it would be opera or theater more with music, but or maybe more like what I did. I'm not sure, but I love this idea of taking text or a scene, a dramatic element, and bringing music to that. I also would just love, I mean, if anybody gave me the choice, I would love to write music for any of these amazing, well-established new music ensembles that are out there that can be hard to, connect with sometimes, but that would be amazing. So I'd love that too.
Well, it's out there now. So if you're listening, we always like to close episodes with our favorite question. Can you name 3 pieces of music that you're listening to right now?
Let's see. A lot of children's music. Does that count? Laurie
Sure.
Berkner. Laurie Berkner is a great children's music artist. Now, I listen to Carnatic music. So there's a singer named Aruna Sairam, and she's amazing. I guess I'm listening to like one of her albums, if that counts. I don't know if I need to be specific with a piece, but yeah, check her out. There's always Metallica.
Yes.
Really? All right. Yeah.
Do you have a specific song or album?
I mean, they say that when you're a teenager, that's like the music that sticks. I always loved Black. I know all the other albums are great too, but that's the one I liked. And yeah, I actually do listen to children's music. I might just throw that out there. Laurie Berkner, she's great. She's got some good stuff. So yeah.
Well, those are new to us, so that's
There
helpful.
you go.
Asha, thank you so much. It's been great reconnecting with you this afternoon.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so pleased to reconnect with you too.
Yeah. We're very excited about this album with Erin Lesser. So we'll keep our eyes out for it.
For sure. Well, it's going to be a little while down the road, but because it's a big
Sure.
project, but yeah, we're excited about it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com.